The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.
Hey, Daniel.
Hey Jake, how you doing, man?
Welcome. I'm
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks for coming on this live with me to talk about your work. Really interested to have this conversation with you and really appreciate your time.
Likewise, man. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. I learned about your work through our mutual friend Tyler and was really fascinated about your perspectives on past lives and how that can be a therapeutic benefit. I'm really interested if you could begin by just telling us a little bit about your work and what exactly you do with past life regression hypnotherapy.
So I'm the co-director at the Center Military in the late 1950s and would go on to have his own fascinating career, which my dad's life was ultimately more interesting than mine in totality, although I've got a lot of runway left. So, who knows what'll happen in the future. But yeah, I learned ultimately as a kid being around my dad, I had the benefit of being exposed to a lot at a young age and being able to practice a lot at a young age to figure out ultimately what I responded to and what felt, truly worthwhile to me and what was kind of, new age fluff or stuff that might be able to, you know, be set aside. And just developing that kind of awareness and taste through experience was deeply instructive and helpful to me. Actually, past life regression was the first therapeutic intervention of any sort that helped me in my life, and it came through my family.
Wow.
So in my practice today, I've been practicing in the city now for almost a decade. I'm very proud and pleased to say that my practice is about as diverse as the population of New York City can offer a person. I've had the benefit and honor of working with individuals and groups and companies. I do a fair amount of corporate consulting. It's funny, of course, there's a lot of working with vocabulary and, past life regression in a corporate setting becomes narrative meditation and certain things get, edited or changed around. But, it is, as we were talking a little bit about New York City and just what it offers you, before this conversation, the city has really made my career possible in many ways, and being able to work with so many different entities, individuals, artists, groups, companies, productions, has just been really, really wonderful. So to answer your question about the healing that can come through past lifetimes, Jake, and of course we can get into the details with it. It's case by case. Every person is different. I always say, I defer to the people I work with as the experts on themselves. So I'm not going to tell anyone what is a genuine past life memory for them and what isn't. I'm really here to guide people, among other things. But, did I lose you there?
Right. Yeah, what that reminds me of is it's similar with visions that people experience through ayahuasca and things like this, where there's a lot of debate as to the validity of these types of experiences. But if they have content that benefits the lives of the people that are experiencing them, then that in and of itself is real. Whether or not the goat-headed entity that gave them, the keys to letting go of their childhood trauma was real, at least that experience was powerful enough for that person to have that, enabled them to kind of move on in a particular way. So I think it's similar. I think that a lot of things get muddy because we don't really have a clearly defined science to be able to discover what is actually real within our kinds of astral experiences and what isn't, like how much of our dream content is really real. These are kind of like questions that lie unanswered.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also interesting to me because yeah, like I would consider New York culturally to be a bit heavy on the intellectual side. You know,
I
it's like
agree.
people seem to generally lean more towards Freud than Jung in New York. So I could imagine there's kind of like a bit of resistance towards these kinds of ideas. And it's interesting to hear how you approach it to try to integrate it into the culture, especially in a corporate setting.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. And for what it's worth, actually, you might be shocked by how amenable parts of New York City are to past life regression. And, of course, there's such a hunger for these things as well here. As we've mentioned, there are so many artists and creative people here that are also interested in past life regression as a creative intervention or as, different kinds of experiences than just therapy, although it is also a very effective therapy when applied in that way. And to your point, yeah, there's a cacophony of opinions, and everybody will naturally, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here, but it's very natural, of course, to have questions about the afterlife or past life regression or the nature of these experiences. But when it comes to the one-on-one experience that you have with a client working through, fill in the blank, whatever the issue or the problem might be, that cacophony of opinions, frankly, has no relevance and should not. That should not be allowed into the sanctity of that relationship because it has no relevance. It has no place there. And frankly, there's more chance for it to do harm than there is any kind of good in most cases.
Right. Yeah. And the kind of practice should stand alone and stand up for itself without people's opinions or beliefs weighing too
Yeah,
heavily on it. And
yeah,
people
and
also
not that,
should kind of, is that what you're saying?
yeah, and pardon my interruption. The essentially, yes, just that the relationship that the therapist and the client or the therapist and patient have is the most important thing. Is the crux and essence of everything that's important in that relationship. That there is no need for a third party or these opinions about the afterlife or something like that. And I just want to state, to be clear again, I have as many questions as the next person about what happens in the space between lives, even working with past life regression. So it's a very level playing field, actually, in my opinion.
Well,
Have
that
you
was something I was
experienced?
actually really curious to talk to you about is,
Sorry.
have I experienced past lives? I've
Yeah.
had visions or, oh, it's okay. I think there's a little bit of a delay, which makes the kind of overlap inevitable. But I've had experiences through ayahuasca that have sort of felt to me like past life experiences, where I've kind of had memories of other people's lives in such a way that I can only conclude that they were past life experiences. But
Mhm.
when you're kind of opening your mind up to such a wide vista and expanse, it's difficult to discern what is a true past life experience and what it could just be you sort of empathizing or tuning into another person's experience, but I don't know if I've ever really had experiences where I can truly say like, yeah, I'm sure this is who I was in a past life, or not. It's hard to say, but I'm definitely curious about it. And I wanted to ask you just if doing this work has given you a clear understanding of reincarnation and kind of what happens when we die in general.
Back dated some, not all, of those stories, but some of them, and found them to be true in utterly inexplicable, detail and circumstances that children would spontaneously recount in no details of these past lifetimes. Now, this is all recorded in Ian Stevenson's book, and this research is continued by Jim Tucker today. And the reason I'm telling you about him, he and I have emailed a little bit. He's a lovely man as far as I can tell. And in his conversation, he really made it very clear for me, something that I was struggling with and trying to figure out for myself in my own practice. And, told me essentially, and I can direct you to the reference of this if you're curious, but that the division of
Sure.
perceptual studies and these, researchers don't use past life regression as a means to prove or disprove the afterlife. And, frankly, despite its being an effective therapy for many people, feel it is too subject to the filters and biases and perspectives and early life experiences and all of the natural associations and parts of our identity that we will bring into a past life regression. And that includes me as the hypnotist, not just the person having the experience. And that all of this ultimately colors the experience too much to be any kind of reliable, consistent, scientific tool for proving or disproving the afterlife. And ultimately, I completely agree. And so I tell everybody that I work with, and this is true for me as well, that past life regression is not a good tool for proving or disproving the afterlife, and extraordinarily useful and versatile for many reasons. It's live. I do feel spiritually, physically, and otherwise has prepared me for the afterlife. So in a way I can say yes, but ultimately to be completely honest and answer your moment and how to govern my relationships, and that the information that we're talking about could be the size of an ocean ultimately. I'm being a little oversimplified with my metaphors here, but just that. And also too, tell me, man, if there's a little lag on our line, we can restart the call or something like that if you think it would be helpful.
I think that it's okay for now because I can hear you clearly.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems to me that cultures that have a worldview that adopts the idea of reincarnation, that has a definite effect on their behavior and kind of their morality. Like the Tibetan belief that every single being has at one point been your mother definitely creates a culture that has greater compassion and things like that. So I can imagine that it can be a kind of remedy from the almost nihilistic postmodern worldview that could influence people's behavior and experience of life very greatly to have an experience that helps them adopt the belief of some existence that's greater than just this limited belief, or just this limited existence. I'm sorry. I'm really curious though. Can I ask you one thing? So you were saying that. Okay. Yeah. So you were saying that the past life regression therapy was the first really powerful therapeutic intervention that you experienced in your life. I'm curious about how your own experiences with past life therapy have influenced your life and what you've gained personally from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a long answer to that question. My own experiences with past life regression start when I was 13 years old. And, the first past life regression I ever did, I went into an experience as, again, 13-year-old boy, so going back over 25 years now. I went into an experience as a woman in her early 20s in the Great Plains of the United States during expansion into the West. I had this experience as a bride to a kind of banker husband who was a caricature of the Monopoly man, or a very kind of greedy kind of archetype. And, he left me high and dry. He took off without a cent. And I think he took our kids with him, just die while doing dishes. And all of the less difference between those, able to apply at the time that was a very heated and dramatic sibling rivalry. And that's the first and still one of the more pronounced examples that I'll go to for a number of reasons. One of the few things also in past life regression that I do believe is so impactful and that brings people into the experience is the opportunity to have an experience as another gender, another age, another race, another culture, another ethnicity. I mean, sometimes extraterrestrials, of course, animals, non-human experiences of all sorts. So it's kind of incredible, actually, the elasticity of consciousness during past life regression and how many different forms we can touch. So, coming back to your question about how it's influenced me, and that just being that first one, doing this over so many years and experiencing, I don't know how many other of my own, what could be past life memories, but just my own experiences there. Again, coming back to, past life regression being more of a teaching tool for the present than the past. It at a young age, I do think, gave me a foundation for things like death positivity, philosophy, of course, every possible perspective on reincarnation, rebirth, resurrection. There's a beautiful Joseph Campbell quote where he says that every religion is true insofar as the metaphor is true. And how could we not understand Christ's resurrection if we're not seeking rebirth in our own lives? And how could we not understand Arjuna's plight if we're not torn between duty and family? Or the Buddha's quest if we're not also seeking enlightenment? So, every religion is true insofar as the metaphor is true. And I feel the same way about past life regression. And all of the, past life memories or just experiences that I've had in past life regression all contribute to, a number of things, all contribute foremost. You mentioned young Freud a few moments ago. I like both those characters at the end of the day. And, Jung's idea of the collective consciousness, I think, is more applicable in a sense, and that, past life regression even, there were a couple of things even you mentioned, Jake, that reference this. But, another thing I believe through, experiencing enough of my own past life regressions is this idea that it's not Dan's past lives or Jake's past lives or even an individual's, but this shared human history that we're accessing, that we might call the collective consciousness, and that the earth is creating people the way the tree creates leaves, and that, we pass with the seasons, but that while we are tapping into this shared human history, that is in all our DNA, that it really, I hate to start just talking in cliches, but, it does get back to this sense of interconnectivity to one another, a sense of a shared history, a sense of, a common community and a shared human story. Coming back to archetypal psychology, this sense of there is a grandfather and a grandmother in each of us, a mother and a father, a son and a daughter, a hero and a villain and everything else. So, it gives us this opportunity, especially with continued and consistent practice, to touch so many parts of the human story from so many different points of view that, it would take me a very long time to be able to try to sum up the impact on my life. I don't think I could. But again, it brings us back all the time to this very fundamental sense of, interconnectivity. Right now is the thing that matters. It's called past life regression, but it's all in service of this present moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that also. I think that it's at least beneficial to think about that it's not necessarily our own personal past lives, but we could also be experiencing, I don't know, that our intelligence in regards to our guiding system could put us in touch with some kind of experience that we need to have in order to learn a particular lesson, and that by surfing through the collective unconscious, you might come into contact with some type of experience, like that experience that you had of that woman who is married to that man that helped you with your relationship with your brother. It's hard to say if that is specifically us in a really I don't know, like objective sense, or if that's just us experiencing something that is a useful experience for us to have in order to grow in the particular way that we need to grow in this lifetime.
I agree. One of my
I'm not
favorite.
skeptical at all, by the way, of past lives.
There's a great Voltaire quote where he says that it's not strange that we would live more than once. Everything in nature is resurrection. And, you know, I do tend to agree with this idea. And I feel that all the evidence that we could possibly need to at least embrace the concept of reincarnation is in fact present in nature. You know, I'd go so far as to say, Jake, even we have to put blinders on to fucking not recognize it. You know, like we have to almost pretend. So yeah, I agree. And one of my favorite questions with past life regression that I think is an utterly natural question as well is, what if I'm making it up? You know, this is one of the common and again, I think most sensible questions. And my response always has to be, well, yes, of course we are making it up. The experience is coming from us. There's no question. But what part of us is making it up? What part of us is speaking? What part of us is listening? What part is this coming from and going back to? You know, looking at, again, just the nuance and being able to honestly respect these voices inside of us and not dismiss them as just a movie I saw or just a book I read or just this or just that, but, you know, to play with it and to be curious. And, you know, again, I say that appreciating everybody is at a different point in their own development and conversation. You know, somebody in their early 20s might need something different than somebody in their 40s. And, you know, this is not a problem. It's just a matter of meeting people where they are.
Yeah, I think that as we grow into adulthood, we get socialized to kind of reject anything that might be against the paradigm of, you know, rational materialistic thought. And when we're kids, we seem to be a lot more open to these kinds of ideas. Kids are very kind of playful in their worldview, and I think that that's extremely useful because the more flexible and open your mind is, the more potential you have to realize kind of novel and creative ideas. So I understand why people would question these experiences. I think that in some cases it's a response to a fear of being shamed for having them, because we come from a culture that rejects these ideas, and you're you know, you're really out there if you think about these things, or if you entertain these ideas in a lot of cases. But your work shows that they are actually useful experiences for people to have, and that stands up alone by itself, you know, even if it's against the grain of what is the dominant paradigm of our times.
Yeah, and, you know, just coming back to my experience as a child, growing up around past life regression, I had the strange and fortunate experience of seeing it be, you could call it an awakening, an awareness at a young age that, no, this stuff is useful. I've seen people get better from it. You know, I've seen people have trauma when they walked in the morning and leave in the evening feeling lighter, you know? And so without wanting to make it sound like any kind of miracle cure of any sort, 'cause of course it isn't that either. But just ask myself, it's like, okay, so what am I going to do as a job? You know, what am I going to do to support myself in life? And where's my joy come from in my work? And eventually did decide to continue my father's work and inherited his practice. But it's useful, and, you know, I mean, and it's also a deeply modern therapy. Agreeing with everything that you say about it going against, say that, you know, I also think we live in an age that's perfect for past life regression.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the process of what it looks like for somebody going through the hypnosis session. And do you find that certain people are more receptive to it than others? Is it difficult for some people to have these kinds of experiences, and why do you think that is?
So my sessions, just to tell you a little bit about how I work, are 60 to 75 minutes long. And my first goal of what people want to work on, pardon me, what people want to work on, what progress would feel like for them. And, you know, most of the time I'm working with present-based hypnotherapy, offering people anxiety and stress relief. You know, past life regression, I do, you know, maybe in about 30% of my one-on-one work, and then I do more in my group work. I'm seeing some comments about, but so
Yeah, it's a little blurry, but I can hear you just fine.
okay, all right. The process, you know, after the first half of the session, once regression, so different practitioners have their own style, present moment awareness, deep breaths, and a lot of other ingredients that we will find regularly in the experiences of meditation. But of course, the intention of past life regression and the technique is ultimately very different experience and where they're coming from. So, for instance, you mentioned before about psychedelics and, you know, various forms of inner work we've spoken about. For an experienced psychonaut who is comfortable generally with inner work and has experience in these realms, past life regression might be pretty familiar and relatively easy for the mind to grasp and get into. But then for, you know, a 22-year-old maybe who's coming to it for the first time, has experimented a little bit with meditation, but, you know, doesn't really know too much about it, this person, you know, is probably going to have a different experience. And, you know, I sometimes describe it as developing sight. You know, if we can say, you know, just speaking kind of abstractly for a moment, that during a past life regression, we're viewing through the third eye, you know, developing that sight and, you know, orienting oneself in the senses during that experience, it really, like everything else in the world, improves with practice. So, you know, a first session is very different than a second session, which is very different than a third session. And I really would recommend for you, Jake, and anybody else who's interested in past life regression, whether it's with a practitioner like me or doing YouTube videos or, you know, any of the free options that are available to us, that practicing past life regression more than once, you know, maybe like 6 or 7 times, you really, and again, maybe this is true of anything, you can get this deeper, finer sense of, okay, these are the kinds of benefits that can come out of it. These are the challenges. This is the part I like about it. This is the part I don't like about it. And again, there's so much cool stuff hiding in past life regression. Like, you know, I've looked at a little bit of your art, for instance, which is incredible. And, you know, past life regression, man, I think you would love it because like, it is a deeply sensory psychedelic experience from many points of view, and opening the third eye and the visuals that come through past life regression. And of course, they're different than the visuals we might receive in other experiences, but, you know, that's also a reason to do it. This is a different flavor. You know, this is a slightly different thing. And it can have so many other threads attached to it that are also so potent. Again, you know, the spiritual questions we might bring into it, family constellations, lineage or ancestry, you know, sex, death, and rebirth, you know, just about anything we can imagine in terms of psychology. So, so just, yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, well, I absolutely think that the third eye is a muscle that can be trained, and that the more you practice kind of visualization or even lucid dreaming or these other kinds of practices that directly relate to the function of the third eye, that it can become stronger, your experiences become more intensified, your recall becomes better. So it makes sense that if you'd practice doing these past life regressions numerous times, that the experiences would become more potent. Something I was really curious to ask you about, and we only have about 5 minutes left, is do you think that people's traumas in past lives can influence them in this life You know, if somebody has an irrational fear of the ocean, for example, but they don't know where that comes from, is it possible that that is stemmed from some kind of trauma of drowning in a past life, for example?
Hmm. Well, remember when we were saying a couple moments ago that it might be a collective consciousness that we're drawing from as opposed to an individual's past lifetimes? I feel, you know, appreciating your question, history is prescient in general, and history is traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, our shared human history and the trauma therein, yes, I do believe continues to affect every one of us, in fact. Then you have an individual's inherited genetic memory, the DNA of the family, and the history of the family, and any trauma that took place in the generations preceding that person, the genetic signatures of that trauma, and how that is communicated, expressed, ignored, or validated. And then the individual, as you mentioned before, you know, early life experiences and wherever this person might be, you know, whether it's somebody in their teens or early 20s versus somebody in their 40s or 50s. So place in life does matter. And that trauma, yes, yeah, to answer your question, the force in the background that is exerted by trauma in general, physiologically, cognitively, neurologically, it can be and usually is great. So, you know, the trauma that takes place in what we're referring to as past lifetimes, again, I think the memory of trauma in the body that is carried through past lifetimes, through lineage, and through present lifetime. Again, you know, there are many ways that we can work past it and beyond it, and focusing particularly on the post part of post-traumatic stress. You know, and for all parts of the brain and the person, and, you know, wanting to answer your question specifically, yes, you know, I do, Jake. I do think that, you know, whether we want to call it past life trauma or whether we want to just put it in this category of mysterious forces that we as humans don't understand yet that impact our lives and psychology, yes. You know, I do believe that that's there, and I do believe I confront it often in myself and with my clients. I don't know that it's always past life trauma, you know, because to your point before, and what we're saying about all of these opinions, I don't know, and it's not my job to know, you know, this is definitely a past lifetime, and this is just a movie you saw, and this is that, and this is that. But again, more than anything else, to make the experience as useful as it possibly can be. So to the extent that that means helping this person put behind them any trauma, grief, sadness, or anything they don't need, and access the resources or positive psychology of how they would like to feel, yeah, man, we're always engaged in that, you know? So long-winded answer, and it's the short answer is yes. But again, you know, I am more captivated by the mystery of all of it today as a practitioner than, you know, than I was 10 or 20 years ago. So there's always this embrace we have to offer and accept to the unknown, right? So yeah, I
Yeah, I
embrace.
really appreciate that perspective.
Yeah.
I appreciate you staying so open and not claiming that you know. I think that it's very wise to say I don't know, because yeah, there are many mysterious forces, and certain cultures had put more weight on, you know, astrological influences, planetary influences that could have as much to do with our experience in this present reality as past lives do, or whatever. It could be neither of those things. It could be both of those things. We don't know, and I think that that is what, you know, makes us that's what's fascinating about existence, is being able to realize that there's so much that we don't understand, and just staying open to that and sort of trying to rest within the mystery without trying to grasp too much at some kind of answer, because it seems like whatever answers we grasp at, it just produces more questions. But this is a fascinating conversation, man, and I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate everybody who's tuned in to listen to us talk about this today.
Very much, Jake, and I would love to do this again sometime. I apologize. My connection is usually super.
Sure, absolutely, man. I mean, we could maybe even do it over Zoom or something to make sure that the connection is better.
Sounds good.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks to everybody who has tuned in. Much love to all of you, and thank you again, Daniel.
Jake, have a great night. Thank you,
Enjoy the
everybody.
rest of your evening.
You too.
The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.